Hello, everybody. I think I shall. Had I had the opportunity, probably I would have changed the title slightly to, instead of the quest for a national project, should be quest for the elusive national project. But I shall read, just to give myself a chance to stick to the time allotted. There should be little doubt about the cost of this war. It is estimated that so far no less than 5.3 million have been dispossessed because of the fighting, 4 million of whom are displaced inside Sudan, and about 1 million are now refugees or asylum seekers in neighboring countries. The sudden outbreak of the fighting and the fact that the theater of conflict is the capital city, the most densely populated area of the country, has amplified the suffering and human cost of this war. Whole areas of the city, and therefore families, were cut off from services essential for their well-being for months. Soon after the start of the fighting, market shops were shut down. The most impactful and tragic crisis had been the systematic disruption of health provisions due to unsafe conditions for staff to operate, or through deliberate targeting of these facilities by the warring parties. We are at a point now where every death among civilians is more than likely is an access death caused by indirect hostilities. And we are witnessing again the return of genocidal mass killing in Darfur. The scale of the human tragedy there is unimaginable. There is also a great damage inflicted on the economic well-being of the country. Dr. Ibrahim al-Badawi, the ex-finance minister of Sudan, made a study that concluded that the capital stock sustained a $50 billion reduction in Khartoum alone. At the same time, a conservative estimate suggests that Sudan GDP has been reduced by 20%. This means in 5 months of the war, the GDP has shrunk by about $7 billion. Bringing it down to $29 billion per annum, which is in fact quite low starting point even before the war for a population of about 45 million. If this war continues and runs its natural course, which is estimated as between 15 and 20 years, it is quite creditable that in Sudan we will lose about 190 billion to $2.2 trillion. Given the loss of life, the suffering and the economic damage, it is the right moral position to demand a stop to this war, which is described by both protagonists at one point as senseless and a war in which no one will win. We hope peace initiatives undertaken by the international community succeed, and we see an end to the fighting. This is the third time the international community is seriously engaged with the ongoing Sudanese crisis. The repeated cycles of peace deals and transitions to democracy, followed by military coups and dictatorships, suggest that there is something amiss in the country's body politic. There is a countervailing force that militates against establishing a national political project that could unite all Sudanese people behind a common goal. This particular aspect of Sudanese political culture is being extensively discussed and pored over. There is a broad consensus that the process of state and nation building in Sudan has been held back for over a century by progressive racialization of the state. Nothing better illustrates this racialization more directly than the two earth-shattering events of Sudanese political life of the last 2 decades. The first, the secession and subsequent independence of the South. The second is the recurring genocide in Darfur. Looking at the ongoing course of this war, it is easy to see how it could metastasize into an all-out ethnic conflagration engulfing the entire country. This running sore of ethnic friction and violence issuing from Sudan can no longer be described as mere mismanagement of diversity. There is an unmissable pattern here. Successive regimes have invested in racializing those benign differences of phenotype, language, lifestyle to entrench the interest of dominant elites. This tactic of setting ethnicities against each other worked when the South was the imagined enemy within. As it acquired potency from mainlining deep-seated prejudices and enmities in both Christian and Muslim traditions. But when the Islamist regime turned its attention to Darfur, those tropes of holy war were ineffective. Darfur is one of the ancient Muslim communities of Africa. So the regime turned to recruiting local militias along ethnic divides and economic disparities of material wealth between agriculturalists and pastoralists that were also framed as Africans versus Arab tribes. What the regime did in Darfur set out a chain of events that has led directly to this war. The RSF, one of the parties of this war, was the militia fighting the Darfur armed resistance movement. The impact of the revolution has shaken loose old alliances and created new ones, ushered in the RSF as a new political player, motivated by ambition and fear of accountability in equal measure. Despite the heavy toll exacted by this war on confidence in the future, it is imperative to remain open to new possibilities. There are two experiences during the revolution that shed light on why there is a cause for optimism about the future of democracy in Sudan. Both indicate the extent of possible changes engendered by the experience of a struggle against the NCP dictatorial regime. The experience of the sit-in and how it became a living experiment of the values of youth who were fighting for it. For almost the 2 months, the community of the sit-in acted out the slogan of the revolution called for freedom, peace, and justice. People often describe the sit-in as giving a glimpse of what the future of Sudan could be like. Two, whilst the gender process seemed to lack progress, there are a number of informal cessation of hostilities agreements negotiated between the warring parties by civil society organizations, tribal leaders, and revolutionary committees, which are still holding in North, South, and East Darfur states. This should be enough evidence to suggest that this war has been imposed on the population from above, and most Sudanese people see it as only serving the interests of those who started it and continue to fan its flames. The strongest repudiation of the war came from the revolutionary committees who, from day one of the outbreak of violence, have organized themselves with ingenuity and dedication into volunteers' emergency rooms in the capital neighborhood. They took on the task of providing humanitarian relief by operating makeshift ambulances, establishing new medical supply routes to hospital, ferrying doctors and medical staff to where they are needed. They are the true heroes of this war. The hopes of what is possible still alive within the hearts of the young people who led the revolution to victory in its first wave in December 2019, and in the second wave in June 2019. This is after the sit-in crime. And again, in a third wave that forced the retreat of October 25th coup d'etat. We are also aware that we are at a juncture that offers unparalleled opportunity, and not only the stopping of the war, but also of opening the way for a lasting settlement. It is true that all previous peace settlement and transition had produced a distorted and unintended outcome, if not outright failures. The focus has always been on the diagnosis of the problem and the standard course of treatment, but never on the capacity of the therapist to administer the drugs that is being prescribed. The peace agreements always fail because of three deadly sins of non-compacted peace settlements and transition. They inevitably result in power grab. They put emphasis on who governs rather than how to govern the country, prioritize power sharing, wealth sharing over state and nation building, and they put peace above justice and accountability. Democracy can only be built by those who genuinely believe in it and practice it. Transition to democracy is a national project that recognizes that everyone has a stake in it because of its empowering potential of ordinary people. Mass mobilization in support of the transition to democracy is crucial. This is not about size of the crowds, but about the moral force of the argument for democracy. When it is expressed by a mass movement, the moral high ground can never be achieved by winning through political scheming and deal-making alone. State and nation-building projects are compacts that are forged with the people in broad daylight. After all, the scheming and the deal-making is done, not before. It is the only antidote to the countervailing force I have mentioned earlier that fuels ethnic strife and violence. Success of the process is in the gift of a public who trust in it and give it their engagement and participation, without which no democracy is possible. Therefore, to my mind, the route to a successful transition is by turning the usual recipe on its head. Instead of starting with a government, we start with an assembly. This is one mistake made in the course of the December Revolution that everyone acknowledges, that it did probably undermine the entire transition, but no one seemed keen to want to correct it in order to reignite the cooling embers of the December Revolution. A National Assembly along the line suggested in both constitutional documents should include representatives of major pro-democracy political currents, civil society organizations, revolutionary committees, women and youth. Such a proposal should be the first order of business in any future political process. One of the first tasks of such an assembly must be to embed revolutionary committees at the basic level of local government to ensure that democracy is built on a foundation of popular participation by those who fought to bring it about and therefore the most capable of defending it. Thank you.
Right, we have about half an hour for questions. Can I have a couple of takers to start us off? Up the back, there's a hand up there. Let's start at the back. Can't see, I'm sorry, the glasses.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to both of you. I just want to say, I mean, I'm from South Sudan. I also consider myself to be a Sudanese as well. But I think I just want to pose both a question and also very quick comment. Mr. Latif, you mentioned enmities in Christian tradition. I would posit that I don't know if that is an appropriate way to describe what happened in the South. I don't know how much people from South Sudan necessarily felt that they were acting in any type of Christian tradition or clash of civilization tradition. I think those were things that were used as a recourse to get some freedom. Christianity is native well, not native, but has been in the East African region earlier than it was in Europe, and then was imposed in colonialism. But I disagree with the idea that the sentiment of South Sudanese people was of Christian tradition. I also just want to say, I think one of the biggest things that we keep kind of talking over, and I have had the incredible luck in my life to have known Dr. John Garang really well. You know, he was my godfather. And a lot of his critiques about the Sudanese state are being repeated again and again today. And I think that without trying, like, I think it's important to think about this question of revisionism in Sudanese history and in South Sudanese history. And this is something that has plagued like many countries in their nation building. But I get a bit concerned about kind of essentialist ideas of like who's Sudanese and who's not. You know, I mean, I happen to be a member of the Dinka tribe, and we're originally from the Jazeera and Khartoum area. And the country is called the Land of the Blacks. So, I mean, if I'm not Sudanese, who is, right? So the idea, I almost feel like when I look at what happened with Darfur, and when I think about what Dr. John used to say, in many ways, it reminds me you know, of an expression actually in French, which is un homme averti vaut deux, which means, you know, forewarned is forearmed. But in French, it's actually it's better in the sense that they say that a man who has been forewarned is worth two men. And I often wonder why not look at that aspect, that is it actually shocking what's going on, or is it actually just a continued pattern? Because there was a genocide in the South. In the 90s, people were not ready to talk about that, but more people died in the South than in Rwanda. I mean, my mother's family, 75% of them were killed.
Wind things up.
Yeah, sorry. So I just think it's important to look at this in the continuum of a regime that otherizes people in order and deprives them of Sudanese identity in order to then kill them. So by trying to say, well, you know, we're Sudanese too, we're a part of everything, but the central issue is the otherization used as a weapon, is what I would say. Thanks.
Thanks. The gentleman over here, I think, had his hand up. Is it you, sir? No? Somebody had their hand up.
I did.
Yeah, I thought you did, yeah.
Thank you both for the presentations. A hypothetical question. Has there been any attempt or beginnings of an attempt over the last 5 months, I guess this goes to the question of your phrase, Professor, leadership matters, to set up some kind of government in exile, something that is truly representative? It's an extraordinary situation to see an armed conflict between factions that represent nobody. Is there anybody ready to start the inevitable arguments before the conflict is over, so that when it ends, they're ready to start?
Okay, thanks. You'd like to respond?
Yes, and I just want to respond first to the sisters out there. Actually, I agree with you about what you said. That actually the tropes of who's Arab and who's African and who's a Muslim and who's not, I used that, like I tried to say that, but I mean, in the brief time that I had, I couldn't expand. But actually, I know a great deal about the conflict in the South than any other. Mainly because, like you, I am also a descendant of a Dinka family, and that issue is, you know, I'm familiar also with Dr. John's. I don't think I've said anything dissimilar to what Dr. John said, which is these are just tropes that are used to mobilize people in order to set them against each other. Who's Christians, who's... And I also agree with you that actually all of us, one of the most interesting things that is often not talked about in talking about Sudanese history and you know, the kind of the social makeup of Sudan. Actually, I think it's a study that Professor Muntasir and others who did that actually it spoke to the fact that the current current population that actually exists in Sudan is the same population that existed in that area with a few minor alterations for thousands of years. So actually we're all Sudanese, regardless of our phenotypes, regardless of our cultures, religion, and language. As to the question about the government, actually that's the first thing that's been discussed. Because if you remember, there was a couple of sessions in East Sudan fronted by civil society organizations, which put on the table the question of forming a government in exile. But as usual, and I think I can say it in this gathering, that actually people couldn't agree on what the process is of setting a government in exile. And that's typical in Sudanese politics. And that's why I say, actually, to avoid that question, let's start with an assembly, and then let the assembly put together the rest of the constitution order.
Thank you.
Sorry, no, just on this point, on the government in exile, yes, I agree with Ali that there were discussions about it, but which is something called the national mechanism for restoration of democracy and ending the war. Their idea, actually, they did not want to have a government in exile, because then you have conflicting, like two governments, competing for legitimacy. But they wanted to have an emergency government in Sudan, like to take care of immediate issues. But that, of course, required not just an agreement among the various civilian actors, but also what do you do with the de facto government under Sudan? Do you bring them on board? Do you agree? Do you convince Burhan to sign a constitutional decree to dissolve his government and then hand over power? I mean, so it was a beautiful discussion, and I took part in some of that discussion myself. But you can have all that.
Right, thank you. Can we take another couple of questions, please, to go down here first?
Thank you for both speakers. My question perhaps to Dr. Abdel Said Ahmed, because you spoke about the two main parties, or you call them mainstream parties. At this moment of time, putting your topic in the context of the current situation in Sudan and what is going on as we are sitting here now, actually the war moved from Khartoum to Darfur, and namely to Nial and Al-Fashir, and now we have actually planes from Khartoum left the situation there, and they targeted Niala. And because whoever knows Niala here, we have the military base at the west of the city, and we have the Janjaweed or rapid response, based at the three sides of the city. And since the start of the war, they are targeting each other, but so far they did not kill one soldier and they did not kill one Janjaweed. And all what they do, they bomb civilians. Half of the city was emptied. We have a group, we are trying to negotiate between the two parties just to give the civilians like 24 hours to empty the town. That did not succeed, because then they target people who are doing this initiative one by one. They bomb their houses, actually. Whatever going on with the main parties in Sudan, now they're standing by, with the Ummah or all other parties. We can't see anything, no voice, whether about going in Khartoum or any part of Sudan. And I wonder if they are waiting for everything to calm down and they come and took over people again. What is going on in the scene, just in rapid, the rhythm is very, very fast. And the movement from Sudanese, we are waiting for international community actually to step down, and the situation is very sophisticated, whether they have a role to play or not. I think as Sudanese, I don't know what the political parties would do actually to intervene, because it seems just a vicious circle, and all what the government and the rapid response doing, they're just moving from city to another, they're just moving the war from city to another, and people, half of the population died. And I think so far from April until now, I think the number of people who were killed more than people who were killed in the Second or First War. Thank you.
Thank you. I think my question is addressed to both of you, so whomever would like to answer it, you're welcome. I think the tragedy of the Sudanese story, as I mentioned in the early speech, is the fact that Sudan is essentially based on ethnic exclusion, violence, and corruption. And leaders use this thing to continue to sustain their power and their privileges over the innocent people. The same thing has been repeated in South Sudan, as I said earlier. So in the end, even the constituencies that are often accused to be the ones dominating the power, if you go to their regions, the people essentially are poor. So for example, we know that Sudan has been dominated by the northern region all this time, and some of the claims that the RSF are making are true. I mean, they are the same claims that the Southerners and the Darfuris and the people from Nuba Mountains and the people from South Blue Nile have been saying all the time, that Sudan is only ruled by a very small clique from one area. And it's ironic that this is now coming from one of the tools, which is RSF, the creation of the state in order to pursue their power. It's now coming back to them. So the point I'm trying to make is the the previously called Janjaweed are actually using the language of the Southerners to say that, look at the army, look at the diplomatic service, look at the civil service, look at academia. It's 90% from the north, which only constitutes 1.5 million of the Sudanese people. So if you see essentially what's going on in Sudan now, it's an ethnic war. It's a terrible war between two factions, which is basically North Sudan proper that has always dominated Sudan. And now the Western Sudanese, whom traditionally are called the Gharaba, ultimately the war has come home, and this war is a war of attrition, and it can continue, as someone has said before, maybe for another 20 years. Where is it going to end? So my question is, obviously there has to be some kind of peace, and when I look at the international community or the region, there is almost a kind of inertia. Nobody's really putting their weight towards solving this problem. And essentially the innocent Sudanese people need to have a voice. The mechanism, I think, is easy, is simple, but I don't know why it's actually being very difficult from the side of the international community, is to put the two sides that are fighting together, to put as much pressure as is possible on them, and then to have a third party, which are the voice of the ordinary Sudanese people, to be party to that agreement, so that the proper transition happens, and all the things that we are talking about in terms of establishing democracy, civilian democracy is happening. So the question really, what is happening to America? What is happening to Britain? Why is the silence? And why are the talks in Saudi Arabia such a sham? Thank you.
Latif, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether you agree with me or not. I think all the democratic elections which we have in Sudan since 50s, 60s, and 1986, they are not actually electing representative for the constituency. Most of them are agents of the center, more than representing the people. This is not a democracy. It's not a bottom-up. It is a top-down. So the other thing is a political party. You cannot have a democracy if you don't have a democratic political parties. What we have is these two mainstream political parties. They are business, family businesses, more than political party. They represent the interest of the very few elites who are actually leading them. I think that is the problem. The other thing is the Sudanese civil society or civic movement. Just now, with all the deep crisis Sudan is facing, we try to unify the civic movement together. We have like 10 initiatives, and then we have an initiative to unify the initiative, and then we're going to have an initiative to unify the initiative to unify the initiative. We cannot agree. That is our problem.
Okay. This is it's not working. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Now the question by the lady, I don't know to what extent it is relevant to what I said, but in any case, what the political parties are doing with the current crisis, I mean, that is something to be addressed to them in specifically. But what I was trying to say, I'm not ignoring the current war, but obviously nobody can ignore the current war anyway. But obviously that was not my subject. My subject was how did the constituencies, the strongholds of the two main parties. Some people do not like mainstream, but anyway, I mean, I'm just judging by the party that dominated the politics of Sudan since independence, or even before that. How did the constituencies of these two parties transformed over the years, and what caused the changes in these constituencies? That, in my opinion, if there is to be general elections today, definitely is going to be different. Depending on, I mean, obviously, I don't want to roll a dice here, but the point is that I mean, parties in all countries actually, they could form in a particular context, and then they manage to transform themselves in order to absorb the change that takes place in society, because societies do not stand still, and parties as a result should respond. And I think the Ummah Party in particular tried to do a little bit of that in 1986. But after the December Revolution, we haven't really seen any coherent attempt to kind of to respond to the change that happened now. So if you think that the political parties have failed the nation, I already mentioned the fact that after the revolution we haven't really seen any leadership, political leadership given or offered by the political parties. And I was hoping that there would be like somebody who belonged to the Ummah or DUP maybe to challenge me of what I said in my presentation. Now, with regard to what Hafiz mentioned, yes, it could be the case that the parties were not democratic, and even this is true. Even some of the members of the parties who try to do reform, most of them end by leaving, at the end of the day. And but I think we have to recognize the fact that everywhere in the world, political parties are built on interest, right? I mean, sometimes we do have like an idealist idea about, what a good party is. And there is no good party and bad party. There are parties that are built on interest. The interest could be community-based, it could be business, it could be, if you like, societal or whatever, and it could be individual, right? So business communities obviously support a particular party in return for benefits that will benefit their work. Workers support a particular party in return of benefit for their constituency or for their number, and so on and so forth. Even the educated elite also support a particular party. Again, so I mean, we have to recognize it in that manner, and that is why there could be a degree of flexibility that in the course of time parties can transform themselves, and that is where the leadership issue comes. That is, you need a visionary leadership who can find a way to accommodate the changes that are taking place in the society. So I'm not writing off you know, the DUP and Ummah. Now, Hafiz, yes, I mean, if we have democracy from independence without military interference, sustained democracy, the parties will form to democratize. And even, for example, after the December Revolution, many of the young people in the parties, for example, they find it difficult. They are not happy with their leadership, and then the leadership should find a way to accommodate the aspirations of the young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I just the talking about the Hafiz and one the question of the well, first the question of the international community now. I think there is something very, very disturbing about this war, because I remember going to a round table session with quite a few players from the international communities. The first few weeks of the war, wanting to find information about how they could intervene and in what way could they be helpful. And it was quite a task trying to get them to accept that actually this war is being, to a large measure, run by remote control, by elements of the Islamist cabal inside the army. They just, what's your evidence? I mean, that's the thing, which is a legitimate question. But in a sense, you have to be Sudanese, you have to be fairly acquainted with how power politics is played in Sudan to understand that actually something has to be done by these shadow power brokers in Sudanese politics. And I don't think there is a way around it. I mean, if we talk about, this is the problem, is that we don't have successful examples in the 20th century other than Germany and Japan. Of course, comparison is not valid. But if you go even to the European revolution, democratic revolution, which is the last properly successful example of sustainable democratic transformation in the West, parties were not significant. I mean, in America, for instance, they actually resisted the idea of having parties. And all the parties came after the revolutions were embedded and taken shape. Parties emerged out of that maelstrom of competing social and political elites. The significance of this is that then the question is, who was there to actually ensure this process is sustained? It was actually civil society. Civil society, democracies are built on the shoulders of civil societies, not parties. Parties are just a mechanism for peaceful transfer of power and peaceful exchange of power. But actually, in themselves, when you talk about, sort of great transformation within society, that happens by people freely associating in the way that they do as revolutionary committees in Sudan, for instance. That's why I think this is the most significant development in Sudanese politics and society since probably the Kush Kingdom, is that we actually have freely associated independent citizens doing the kind of work that the revolutionary committees do. So I would say that we should move parties are important, because you can't have democratic exchange of power, you can't have transfer of power without parties. But to get to that point where we have sustainable democracy, the key player have to be civil societies. And if we have enough space and freedom in Sudan, which I believe is the most crucial thing that we have to achieve in the coming political settlement, so that people at least are freely associated without breathing down their necks, then we can probably get to somewhere where we can build the kind of civil society that will sustain democracy, whether it is in the north or the south.
Thank you both very much. I think you've both given us much to think about. It's a time of great uncertainty and great violence and conflict. It's something that comments relate to all of us here, where the ground covers trees. All of us who are interested in Sudan have some part to play in trying to stimulate my return to peace. Thank you. Thank you.